Hi, and welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, where we bring hidden stories of survival into the light. I'm Kendra, your host.
And I'm Kass, your co-host for this season. We're diving headfirst into some powerful stories with season 1, and we're honored to have you with us.
This podcast means so much to us. As fellow abuse survivors, Kass and I know how both terrifying and healing it can be to share your story. And for a lot of our guests, this will be the first time they've done so.
Our goal is to amplify and validate survivor stories. Abuse can cause confusion, isolation, and takes incredible resilience to heal from, regardless of age, gender, or type of abuse experienced.
And then there's spiritual abuse. That's another big reason for doing this podcast. A kind of betrayal that often goes unspoken. Abuse cloaked in the guise of faith, whether coming from the perpetrator, or counselors, or pastors, or faith communities. Spiritual abuse isn't just painful. It can leave survivors feeling trapped, silenced by guilt, shame, or the fear of going against everything they were taught to believe.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons we're here. Abuse doesn't always look the same. It can be obvious or it can hide in plain sight. Our goal is to shine a light on these tactics, giving survivors and those who support them the understanding they need to break through the fog and truly see what's happening.
So whether you're a survivor yourself or trying to help someone close to you, we hope this podcast offers a lifeline, a chance to feel seen and understood.
On this show, we invite guests to share diverse and powerful stories of survival. Some have endured spousal abuse, while others have faced abuse from parents, siblings, clergy, or even cults. Our guests, men and women of all ages, bravely tell their stories in hopes of healing, inspiring other survivors, and raising awareness around these complex dynamics.
Each guest story is shared in their own words, exactly how they choose to tell it. Following their story, we'll have a focused lessons learned discussion, highlighting the abuse tactics that surfaced in their story. Finally, we'll bring in experts and experienced voices to unpack the particular type of abuse, exploring its impact on a broader scale, and offering insights into recovery and resilience.
With that, let's begin season 1. Our first guest is Leigh, a woman whose courage is nothing short of inspiring. She spent decades trapped in an abusive marriage. In this season, she's opening up about how this affected her life as a wife, mother, faith leader, and how her beliefs kept her bound to a relationship that became deeply harmful to her and her children.
Leigh's story is powerful, and in episode 1, we'll dive right into her first impressions of Jack, the man who became her husband. Let's listen in and see how her story began.
One final note before we start. Most of our guests use different names to protect their privacy. Also, each story is unique, and the views shared here don't necessarily reflect those of Kendra, myself, or the podcast.
Yes, we'll be including content warnings for each episode. And for episode 1, you'll hear discussions of emotional and spiritual abuse, physical abuse, mental health issues, and violence towards animals. So please listen with care. Here we go.
I think because he was given that title of youth pastor, he wasn't just a Christian, good guy, but that he was elevated in that community. So for me, growing up Jewish, like a rabbi or a cantor, I knew them to be like incredibly solid, holy people. And I thought that that kind of translated to this new faith that I was in, that this person being a pastor, part of this church, must be a man of integrity and honesty. And I think I was always searching, being the firstborn and just my personality, searching for the right way to do things. Here, my anxiety meets up with a person who's supposed to do it the right way, be of integrity, be of a solid leader, etc. It just checked that box off for me, that anxious part of me. Oh, I found someone. He's going to take good care of me because he must be a good person.
A good Christian guy. That's how Leigh first described Jack when they met. But was he? Was Jack really the good guy he claimed to be? Let's go back to the beginning of their story so you can decide for yourself. But before diving into the relationship, here's some background on Leigh's life. Leigh's parents divorced when she was just 4 years old. Her mom later remarried and converted to Judaism, a faith that became central to Leigh's upbringing. Her dad remarried and converted to Catholicism. When Leigh went to college, she met a couple who introduced her to Christianity, and she accepted the faith as her own. Knowing that her new beliefs would cause tension with both of her parents, Leigh was determined to prove that she wasn't making impulsive or irrational decisions. So she made a bold choice. She packed her bags and headed for the West Coast for graduate school. She wanted to put her new faith into action and at the same time show her family she wasn't crazy. She was determined to live out her beliefs with confidence, even if that meant stepping into the unknown. It was during this first chapter of her life on the West Coast that she met Jack. Their paths crossed in a way that felt destined. But as the story unfolds, you'll begin to question, was Jack really the good Christian guy Leigh thought he was? Or was there more to his charm and faith than met the eye? Let's find out.
So my adventure began with a roommate and a job like within 48 hours. So I listened to Amy Grant the whole way. I drove like 2,000 miles singing with Amy Grant, getting there and just, thinking I was going to conquer the world. And there was a group interview for Jenny Craig. I went to the interview, got a job right away. So I was like, oh, this is providential, right? This God's hand is all over. I'm supposed to be here. So I started working at Jenny Craig and loved my clients. I was like a weight loss cheerleader, basically. Really fell in love with a couple clients that were just wonderful people and enjoyed talking to them and learning about their life. And the older one actually said, well, I have 6 children and I actually have a son and I would love for you to meet him. So this family, long story short, they came from this big Irish Catholic family similar to my father and bonus mom's family. And I just saw a lot of joy and all the things that I had grown up watching kind of from the sidelines. Then I started also going to church at the time and made friends with people there, and one of them happened to be a brother of a football star from the city that I grew up in, and so he caught my attention obviously by his name and his family story. And then he said he had someone for me to meet, and it was the same person. So here this mom and now a friend that is semi-famous, or attached to a famous brother, know this person who is a youth pastor and supposedly this fantastic Christian guy from this big, amazing, happy family. So I couldn't wait to meet him, right? So we met. So we met at the end of September. I met the rest of his family in November at Thanksgiving. And I really fell head over heels for the whole picture. I very quickly wanted to be a part of that family and also wanted to be a part of what he was doing with the youth, because that was super fun. I'd never experienced anything like that. I had been part of synagogue and youth groups there, but it looked very different. So yeah, he didn't have to do much to win me to himself. But to be honest, I fell in love with him. He very quickly fell in love with me and expressed that very quickly.
Jack was the youth pastor at a non-denominational church, a type of community Leigh had never experienced before. She recalls being drawn to the sense of belonging it offered. Jack stood out from the start, confident, charming, and deeply embedded in the faith Leigh had only recently embraced. Their connection was instant. Leigh remembers how quickly things escalated between them. From the moment they met, it was a whirlwind. They talked for hours, shared their hopes, dreams, and faith, and before she knew it, they were inseparable. In just 4 months, they were engaged. The speed of their relationship took her by surprise. But Jack had a way of making everything feel right, like it was all part of a bigger plan. But what was it really like during these short months? On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Jack was confident about their relationship, constantly talking about their future, and encouraging Leigh in her new faith. But looking back, Leigh admits there were moments that felt rushed, times when Jack's confidence felt more like pressure. Their engagement came so fast that Leigh hardly had time to process it all. She was swept up in the idea of their shared spiritual journey and the life Jack painted for them. But as she tells her story now, the questions linger. Was it love? Or was there something more going on here?
It was very, I guess, partially thrilling, right? You're getting to know a new person. We spent a lot of time on the phone together, talking until we fell asleep. I found Jack to be entertaining. He was fun. There was a lot of excitement. I was also in a new area of the country that was incredibly gorgeous. Really looked like attending youth group meetings, right? Hanging out with all these kids, which I loved. There was not even a lot of alone time because now I'm in a culture that's very much about abstinence and how, that you're above reproach and everything. So there are always other people around us that were also endorsing him and endorsing the concept of us, right? They were thrilled with how sweet I was and blah, blah. He had said he had been praying for someone, for God to bring someone to him from a distance. And so I fit that, right? I had come all these miles from a whole nother state, a whole nother region of the country. So there were a lot of check.
A lot of spiritual confirmations.
All of it, yeah. And so it wasn't like I'm falling in love and looking at this person as a partner as much as this is a lifestyle that I'm being drawn into. And it looked good, right? It looked like I had a place there. I remember we did a summer camp and Jack gave a sermon. And then I was asked to also give a sermon to the youth that were there. And afterwards, the leaders of that camp approached me about how great I did. And he had been to biblical college. I had only been a Christian for a year, but I was very passionate about kids and what they were going through, and I related well. And so I think I got really drawn into that as well. I could impact the next generation with this person, as a package. It was kind of a package deal. But it moved so very quickly too. I was told when you know, and it looked like all this God gifting and blah, blah. All of this kind of happened at the same time. I'm discovering what a church community feels like. I'm discovering what it feels like to live in this gorgeous, surroundings. And I just fell in love with it all. I fell in love with his family, all his sisters. They're all older than me, and I had been the oldest, so I loved being cared for as the little sister. So it wasn't just me and another person developing a relationship. It was me falling head over heels for the whole package. We had a few of moments of disagreeing, but it was mostly around the intensity and the pace of our relationship. And I remember statements of well, you either know or you don't know. You're all
from Jack
saying kind of misquoting Christ, saying you're either for me or against me.
Oh, nice.
Which kind of, you know what I'm saying? So, and I'm new to all this stuff too. So I'm trying to make sense of the Christianese of it all. We got engaged. It was really early. And he took me to a beautiful restaurant that overlooked the city, and roses were brought to the table, and he gives me a box, and I'm expecting it to be a ring, and I'm overwhelmed because I'm really not ready for this. And we're in a public place, and there's a little note inside that says psych, and he thought that was hilarious. And now I'm really disoriented, right? I'm not sure I'm ready for this. It's all happening. There's all the roses and the waiters know, and they're kind of watching from from the side. And so then he pulls out just a plain little band, no stone or anything, and says, "I'll get one later."
And what did you feel about that?
I just thought, I went back to those inner messages that I've heard a lot in my life that got downloaded that are maladaptive and unhealthy. You're too uptight, you're too sensitive, you're too emotional. Can't you just roll with it? I did have my question marks. I had a few times of pausing, but I didn't trust myself, and I was really listening to this new community of mine.
As we talked with Leigh, we were reminded that there's this unspoken assumption that if someone is a Christian, they must naturally be a person of integrity, someone with great character, trustworthiness, and all the qualities you would want in a partner or a spouse. It's easy to believe that faith alone is the foundation for everything else. And when you're young and still learning, it's tempting to think, if they're a Christian, that's really all I need to know. You assume that faith checks all the boxes. But here's where it gets tricky. We rarely stop to ask, who is this person really? And what's beneath the surface? Many of us didn't always know the right questions to ask or the red flags to watch for. It's a pattern that's all too familiar, placing faith as a stamp of approval without really digging deeper. It's not until later, sometimes too late, that we realize being a Christian doesn't automatically guarantee somebody embodies the qualities we hoped for and expect. It's a wake-up call, a reminder that we need to look beyond the label and ask, who is this person, when no one is watching? Because sometimes faith is just one piece of the puzzle. What happens when you realize it was never the whole story? Leigh decided she was committed to this love story, determined to embrace all the potential that it was promising her. So she headed back home with Jack to have him meet her family.
I took him home to meet my family, and my godmother had us over for this little engagement, get to know Jack dinner party. And my dad, who was never soft-spoken at all, pulled me into the garage and was like, what the hell? I'm like, I love him. He is fine. Kind of like, but you just don't know him. And he's a really good person. He does all this good work. And I'm trying to explain to my dad about my faith change and Jack at the same time. And he's just like, we didn't raise you like this. This is not, he didn't understand. And I said, you did raise me to use my own mind. And he was begging me, just come home for a while. And I doubled down and didn't do it. But he was very clear, like, I don't see anything in this person that should attract you to him. And my godmother got really upset that he was ruining the party with this tension. So then there became tension between the two of them. The whole night was just a mess. The thing I remember about that trip is that my grandma was in a nursing home, and I wanted to take him to meet her. And he said, I don't like nursing homes, and he wouldn't go with me.
Wow.
And that was kind of the nail in the coffin for my parents too. Like, they really didn't like him after that.
Yeah.
I was so swept up in seeing people that I hadn't seen in a while, seeing my grandma in that way, that him not coming, like, didn't bother me as much as it should have. But they talk about that now, about how that was really the first tell, that this isn't just me reading him and saying, I don't like this guy, doesn't show me much, to this guy's an ass, for him not to come see grandma.
Leigh left that visit with her parents feeling a deep sense of disappointment. But in her mind, it had little to do with Jack. She convinced herself it was all about the differences of faith. Her parents were incredibly liberal, and during their time together, they bombarded her with their progressive values, questioning her new lifestyle. In her eyes, their criticism wasn't about Jack. It was about the tension between their worldviews. It was easier that way, simpler. She could dismiss their concerns, believing they just didn't get it. But as time went on, that assumption would start to unravel. Jack began to subtly exploit the tension in her family, a friction that had grown over time due to differences in beliefs and values. What was once a quiet strain became, in Jack's mind, a rallying point, a way to bind them together. He crafted a belief system, one that wove their struggles into something larger, something noble. They weren't just dealing with family disagreements or the usual strain of life. They were suffering for their faith. This idea deepened their bond but slowly isolated her from her family as Jack framed every disagreement as further proof of this struggle. Over time, their world became just the two of them, separate from those who once supported her. Let's hear as she describes how this belief got introduced.
There were a lot of times that Jack would say and compare, like, worldly living The preacher talked about that too. Like, we're not to live of the world. And so anything that people were saying that are in the world, we can discredit. Big mistake. But one of the things that Jack would use anytime there was pushback or somebody saying slow down or did you notice this or pointing out anything that might have been of concern, he would align that to being persecuted for Christ. They just are against us because of this. And so very early on, Jack and Christ, they were held in the same esteem in a way that if I question Jack, I'm questioning everything that Jesus is and has done and who I am in him. It was all blanketed in the same, or couched in the same way.
Was that mostly driven by Jack telling you that, or was that part of the community that you were into?
I think it was mostly driven by what he was saying to me or how I was interpreting things around me. More than likely also sermons that I was hearing. So it was all perspective, right? And I can't really tease apart what was what now, but I know from a very early time in our relationship that to leave him felt like impossible. And that staying with him felt more like doubling down on my commitment to being a Christian woman.
Leigh was disappointed yet committed to endure this new test in their relationship. So they headed back to the West Coast to plan their wedding.
So once we got back, the wedding, of course, took on a life of its own. So anytime you get engaged, like now we're planning a wedding. And we were going to do a spring wedding again because we're these two young Christian people wanting to start our life and not do things the way the world does. So there was like, let's do this quickly. His sisters got on board and they were all excited. And when I talk to them now, they say like, we were just so happy he found someone normal. Like, because we knew that he was kind of a mess his whole life. And like, why didn't you tell me something? But they really embraced me. And it was so great to have these older sisters. You know, they helped take care of the flowers and all the things. And my other family, you know, my father and my bonus mom, they were more excited. They didn't spend time with him, but they were excited for me and kind of thought, well, he's 5 years older. He sounds like he's a good person. And they've got this wonderful family that looks like ours. So they were kind of cheering me on from a distance. So I did all the things for the wedding, like all the planning, all the things that come with the wedding.
Yeah, lots of stuff.
Yeah, and his mom helped with that, so I was getting really close to her. So the wedding came. My dad chose not to attend. He didn't attend for a couple reasons. One is he didn't support the marriage, but also he had a hard time sharing me with my other dad. And so he stayed home, which was really sad. But a lot of times I feel like the conflict or things that happened with my family almost drove me closer to him because the language around it was like, we're going to start our own family. We are family now. We got married in a church. We had the entire youth group, the entire dance team there, you know, because there weren't a lot of people there from my side, obviously, because we were so far away. We did it in his state, not mine. First of all, during the ceremony, they couldn't find him to do pictures because he had disappeared to watch a basketball game.
Nice.
Yeah. And then when we left, he said, we have to stop. He had to get gas in the car on the way to the reception because he hadn't done that. And he had to stop because he also hadn't packed. So I'm like, I did everything and you had like one job. But where he was lacking, the church community that he worked with would fill in the gaps a lot. There was a lot of enabling. So they had decorated the reception hall and provided there was, I think, a lot of that I didn't recognize at that time.
Yeah.
Where he looked competent sometimes, but looking back, oh, well, he had a secretary and a staff and people that were doing things for him to cover his irresponsibility.
And one thing I wanted to point out already, and you telling the engagement story and now the story of the wedding day, is both of those experiences were tainted. Okay? The engagement story was tainted with the joke that isn't really funny. And obviously you didn't think it was funny. And it was slightly immature and wasn't an experience that really you were wanting. And then on the wedding day, you have, this excitement and all this work you've put in. And then he hasn't done the basic things he needs to do, which are very foundational, packing, putting the gas in the car, just basic things. So it's like already those experiences are confusing because they're like, well, is this really a priority? Am I really a priority? Did you really put thought into this? So I just wanted to highlight that that's already happening as we start to further into your story where things, are going to start kind of falling apart a little bit, that was already there.
Yeah. So you experience your wedding day. It goes very, very differently than the fairy tale that you have been advertised. So what happens next after that?
After we start our marriage. We live in a small little apartment. I do my best to, make it beautiful. And we start having arguments, and the arguments escalate to the point where the man that lived below us commented one day that he could hear us. And there was one incident where he chased me down the hall and punched me in the back. And I said, if you ever hit me again in any way, I'm out. I'm gone.
Do you remember what you were fighting about?
I think something ridiculous like the remote or something really ridiculous. And I'm sure I participated. I'm not saying that I was just this innocent human. I was immature as well. I was 23 years old. So we're arguing and there's this tension between us. I had gotten a puppy and he threw the puppy at one point because I was showing the dog more affection I was showing more affection to the dog than to him. So there started to be comments like that where he was super needy, and when he needed attention, he would have kind of a tantrum and would just leave, which triggered my whole sense of being abandoned. And I would chase him with the car and yell, roll down the window and say, get in the car, let's just talk it out and don't leave. And so it was just not the first year of marriage that you would want. And 3 months into our marriage, he went to a camp without me because I was working full time. And he decided to race the school bus on the way home. And it was kind of a final straw for the church. I didn't know there were other straws. I didn't know.
Wait. So he was racing a school bus, or he was
the school bus full of the youth. So he had driven separately. Oh. So the school bus full of the youth from church coming home from camp, he thought it would be funny to race them and was just acting like a high schooler.
Wow.
or younger himself. And there had been some other things that I wasn't privy to, but lo and behold, when he does get home, this is 3 months into our marriage, we get called to have a meeting with the pastor, and the pastor lets him go. And so now...
And you were in that conversation?
I was.
Why?
I don't know. It was a cultural thing.
Okay.
I think that the pastor probably... I honestly don't know. I guess he was trying to include me because I'd been serving in a volunteer position alongside of my husband for all these months of our courtship and our marriage. And I guess he wanted me to understand. But of course, as soon as that went down, we were gone. Yeah. We never, ever got to go back. So we lost all the youth that we were attached to, all the adults that had surrounded us throughout our relationship and our marriage. And we were just, all of a sudden, it was just the two of us and his family. So he lost his job that day, and I lost my community and support. And little did I know that would lay the pattern for the next 20 plus years.